What does Murka, Valentine, and Atomic Heart have in common, you ask? Where they're both from Eastern Europe and they're solely depending on OnlyFans. However, unlike Murka, I have nothing good to say about Atomic Heart. Fortunately, it lacks in pretty much every single department.
But, but why?
I'll kill you.
Let's get it quick out of the way. Does it bother me because it's made by a Cyprus-based company that's 100% sponsored by a Russian guy who used to work for the Russian government? No. Does it bother me that it's a Bioshock ripoff, but it's in the Russian communist era where they're supposed to be pretending that Russian society is at its best, at its peak, and that everything under this crude regime is wonderful? No, not at all. Does it bother me that the Russian patron that sponsored everything actually changed his name to hide his identity, pretending to be an English British guy instead of Russian? No, I mean, he's allowed to change his name. Like, of course not. So I don't let myself fall to the conspiracy theory traps. This video, it's about only and solely about the video game. But if you do have your doubts for some reason and you don't want to put money into Russian pockets, well, you know exactly what you need to do. Nah, I'm joking. Nah, of course not. Just don't play it and wait for Resident Evil 4 instead. The performance, or the lack of. And this really contradicts everything that I've seen on YouTube so far. It really does. If you go above 1080p resolution, it's not good anymore. The game performance, while the numbers showing on the screen look absolutely flawless, the recording itself doesn't do it justice because it's low bitrate. Skill Up said he tested this on 3 different devices and it all ran perfectly. I don't know. 2 of those devices were actually running NVIDIA GPUs. I have 100% AMD computer with a 5700X Ryzen, even something better than Skill Up has, and a 5700 Radeon. Playing this in 2K resolution, and it looks like steady 120 frames, which it's impeccable, right? Wrong. There are micro stutters absolutely everywhere, and while they implemented the DLS technology for NVIDIA, AMD FFSR is non-existent. Also, there's no FOV slider for something that has the audacity to be a first grade shooter. Even though the frame rates are kind of dipping here and there, they are creating micro stutter. Frame drops are kind of everywhere, and as you progress and you go into an open world area, it gets worse, much worse. The first 1 hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of gameplay are actually tempting and quite good. The game is grippy. It constantly gives you new incentive about the story, and they're introducing you to the combat, to the weapon design, everything else. It's always new and fresh for almost about 2 hours. The performance here at the beginning, it's almost kind of too good because you're in close quarters. But as you progress and everything kind of opens up, the performance gets worser. Story stops giving anything new, and gameplay itself becomes tedious and a bit too difficult, even at medium level. This thing is almost between 25 and 30 hours long. And I felt like they're almost cheating you for the money. At first, it's strongly interesting. It gives you this sensitive, very strong start. And then whoever wrote the beginning of the game and whoever put together the beginning of the game, that team all of a sudden disappears. And the rest of the entire video game is made by completely different individuals and just a bunch of amateurs that are just putting the assets on the map. That cool beginning just disappears. It's if the beginning was made by some team and the rest of the game by a completely different amateur team, which honestly, it wouldn't surprise me. Another thing that's not by any stretch of imagination something good, in fact, it kind of sucks, is the whole holding hand concept. Okay, I get it. Not everything has to be open world. In fact, open worlds are not that good, with a couple of exceptions. But here we find almost zero diversity in any pathway. There is no such thing as side stuff. There's no side quests, there's no anything on the side or anything at all. You follow the line strictly in this incredibly linear, one-sided gameplay. Very narrow field of view of telling a story that's not too good to begin with. And yeah, sure, BioWare, it had a very linear story as well back in 2007, but gaming has been changing for the past 15 years or so. We're used to seeing things done differently. And in BioWare, since I'm talking about it, the narrative is strong from the beginning to the end. Here, it's the opposite. I kind of wish this would have been more like the first Metro that I played. This is clearly not the case. In fact, it's not like anything that I've played or anything that I can compare it to that was high quality. At first, fighting is cool, at least in the first 1 hour or maybe two. You get the dodge button, that's okay. Lots of upgrades that the game shows to you that it's a possibility. A skill tree that looks very, very solid. The skills are actually kind of cool too, even when you get to unlock them. Lots of diversity in this region. And you almost feel, because I've been playing Elden Ring and all those other games, you feel like you can make different builds. And when you're thinking about different builds, you're thinking about replayability, right? Oh my god, I get to finish it with one build and maybe I can play the game using a different build. Except you don't want to play the game again. And once you finish it, if you get to finish it, it's done to the point where you never ever want to replay it. Another kind of weird stuff that at first I thought it was a bug, and who knows, maybe it was, but I guess it's just gameplay quote unquote mechanics. The looting system. You know how you press a button in Dishonored, Metro, any other, Bioshock, since I mentioned it, any other shooter, and you get the loot? No, not in this game. This is completely different, but not in a good way. You need to keep pressing the F button to pick up everything in your way. The F button hovers the hand and magically opens up all the drawers, all the covers, all the lockers. At first I thought it was a bug, but then I realized this is how the game was intended. You enter a room and instead of getting one drawer, maybe two to open, you open 20, 30 drawers in one single room, scavenging that takes between 1 or 2 minutes to find little pieces of items that you can use to craft stuff later. It ends up being this farm simulator because you're constantly going in each and every single room, and even if you don't want to, you end up searching through everything, hovering the hand with F like a mad person. It's time consuming, but I did it anyways, all up until the end of the game, even though I hated it. I mean, you need the resources to upgrade. It's just weird. And sometimes the F button doesn't do anything. You need to crouch, stand up, just to trigger it. Not fun. Atomic Heart, unlike Morka, doesn't feel right, or it's 100% single player that's supposed to be immersive experience with a very nice skill tree and tons of weapons and customizations, plus a million cutscenes everywhere. Immersive story, but not really, because none of it comes together as a full package. Man, it was one of the games that was announced this year, and I guess everyone wanted this to be a hit, including myself. But instead of a hit, it's a miss. It's a hard miss at something that had potential to be remembered over the years. Instead, I just want to forget about it. I stand by my initial words in criticizing, saying that whoever they paid The money to make the first part of the game did not make the rest of it. It all feels disjuncted, as if, they give you 1, 2 hours to grip you and then it slowly dulls and dissipates. Those people that made the first part have left, and the rest was put together and completely designed by amateurs. It bothered me that the enemies were constant, spongy, and they had so much HP. You never ever have enough ammo. Never. You upgrade a bunch of weapons, you unlock a bunch of weapons, you never ever have enough ammo. They give you very little ammo and too many bad guys. You end up playing instead the entire video game using the melee weapons. And I wish I kind of foresaw this at the beginning when I was investing in my skill tree. You never ever have enough bullets, and that's frustrating. And when you end up doing the whole melee situation, you end up hitting guys like 10 times just to take them down. Bosses become tedious, and the reason for that is because they have a ton of HP, and every single boss, while they look different, the mechanic is always the same: dodge, hit, run, dodge, hit. And takes 10 minutes before you know it, the boss is dead. Nothing different about it. Every single one is copy pasted. In other type of very story driven shooters like BioShock and Prey, as you progress you get stronger. Yes, the enemies get stronger too, but you also feel like you're being overpowered. You find lots of ammunition around and you're constantly just enjoying kicking ass. You welcome the fighting moments because you're stronger and you're getting stronger. Here is the opposite. Fighting is tedious, and I got to the point, honestly, after about 4 or 5 hours, realizing that everything is getting more difficult, and even if I'm doing these upgrades, I'm not really getting stronger. After about 10 hours, I didn't want to play this anymore, man, and I was not enjoying the fighting, which, being a shooter, you don't do that much shooting, and being a shooter, it's all about the fighting. But here, instead, it felt repetitive and boring because the enemies were so spongy. When the fighting eventually stopped, you always get a bunch of cutscenes as the story tries to sluggishly progress along in a bad way. In fact, there's not much happening. Everything is very predictable, and the main character and his voice acting and the lines they gave him, man, you just cannot connect with this guy at all. He's supposed to be this incredible Russian badass KGB type of dude. Instead, he's always moaning and complaining, and he feels like a little girl. Everything bothers him, and he's the opposite of a tough guy. As the world really opens up and you end up in a village and whatnot, the performance starts to take its toll. And before you know it, all these minuses, they add up and they impacted my experience. I felt like I was farming for resources everywhere where I went, and I didn't like it. I was grinding out the fights with all these bad guys, and the puzzles started getting more difficult and difficult for no reason. Nothing rewarding was behind those doors or finishing those puzzles. They were there, thrown, just to fill in the gaps, I guess, for the sake of gameplay. And as the hours went along, the story didn't get better. I really started losing patience with it. As the conclusion, like the title says, Atomic Heart, for me, it feels like it's only for the fans. It's for OnlyFans. If you are a lover or a fan of the Russian ideology, the old school Russian lifestyle, the old school communist area, and those vibes, here in this video game, you can find them. What about the rest of us? You're asking? What if you're not a fan? Well, there's always Murka. She's on OnlyFans. But kidding aside, you should probably wait for something else, because this isn't it.